Clara believed her husband, Liam, was a simple man, a moderately successful freelance architect who was content with a life lived in the quiet shadows of her own brilliant ascent in the corporate world. She saw his worn leather journal, his quiet evenings sketching, his preference for old books over new society, as evidence of a man with no ambition. She thought the foundation of their life was the one she had built. She didn't know the foundation was his, and that he had designed it to withstand any storm. Within a single evening, she would discover that the quiet man she had long since dismissed was not the architect of a modest career, but the architect of empires, including the one she was about to lose. That night felt different. The lie had a different weight to it, a finality that settled deep in Liam's bones. For 3 years, Tuesday had been client dinner night. A necessary evil, Clara had called it, a tiresome but essential ritual of whining and dining difficult clients to secure the big accounts. Liam had accepted it, the way he accepted her need for a larger house, a more prestigious car, a life adorned with the trappings of success he found utterly exhausting. He accepted it because he loved the woman he thought she was, or perhaps the woman he remembered her to be. But the lies, like hairline fractures in a support beam, had been spreading for months, and tonight, he knew, the entire structure would come down. Thank you for joining us for this story. We create these narratives to explore the moments that change everything, and we're so glad you're here to experience it with us. If you enjoy stories about quiet strength and the eventual triumph of truth, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And we'd love to know where you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Now, let's return to the quiet restaurant where a carefully constructed world was about to be dismantled, piece by piece. The house was a testament to Clara's tastes, not his. It was a cavern of polished concrete floors, sharp-angled furniture, and vast, impersonal windows that stared out at a meticulously manicured lawn. It was a showroom, not a home. Liam's only sanctuary was his study, a small room lined with overflowing bookshelves and the warm scent of old paper and cedarwood. His desk, a slab of reclaimed oak he'd finished himself, was the only piece of furniture in the house that bore his touch. On it always was the journal. To Clara, it was a diary of his little projects, his quaint but unprofitable passion. To Liam, it held the blueprints of a fortune she couldn't begin to comprehend. Inside its pages were the initial schematics for Ethelred, a proprietary architectural modeling software he had developed in his late 20s. A software so revolutionary it had been quietly acquired by a global tech giant for a sum that had ensured he would never need to work another day in his life. He had sold it under a non-disclosure agreement so strict, and through a holding company so anonymous, that his name was attached to nothing. He had wanted it that way. He had won a life of quiet purpose, to design and create for the love of the craft, not for the demands of a balance sheet. He had wanted a partner who valued the man, not the portfolio. For a time, he thought he had found that in Clara. Her condescension had been subtle at first, a gentle teasing about his hobby projects. It had curdled over the years into open disdain. Her parents, Arthur and Eleanor Vance, were even less subtle. They were old money, the kind that judged a man by the brand of his watch and the zip code of his office. Liam, who worked from a small study and wore a simple, vintage timepiece his father had given him, failed their assessment on all counts. Dinners at their palatial home were exercises in humiliation. Arthur would hold court, pontificating about market trends and acquisitions, before turning to Liam with a pitying smile. And how are things in the world of blueprints and balsa wood, Liam? Still designing those charming little extensions for the suburbanites? The question was a gilded dart, designed to remind everyone at the table of Liam's perceived station. Clara would offer a weak, tight-lipped smile, a silent enabler to her father's cruelty. She never defended him. Her silence was a betrayal far deeper than her father's insults. Liam would simply meet Arthur's gaze, his expression calm and unreadable. "The work is rewarding, Arthur. I enjoy building things that last." The response was always the same, a quiet statement of fact that only seemed to fuel their derision. To them, his lack of outrage was proof of his weakness. They mistook his patience for passivity, his silence for surrender. They had no idea that he was in fact building something that would last. He was building a case. He remembered one evening in particular, about 6 months prior. They were at the Vance estate for Arthur's birthday. Clara was wearing a shimmering designer dress, a recent purchase she'd justified as a business expense. Liam wore a simple, dark wool suit, impeccably tailored but unbranded. Julian Croft, a man Clara had introduced as a major potential client, was there. He was everything Liam was not: loud, ostentatious, dripping with logos. His watch was a brick of gold and diamonds that screamed for attention. He spent the evening draped over Clara, his hand possessively on the small of her back, his laughter echoing through the cavernous dining room. He barely acknowledged Liam, and when he did, it was with the dismissive air of a man swatting away a fly. "Clara tells me you're an architect," Julian had boomed, his voice slick with expensive scotch. "I'm a developer. I build monuments. We're in the same game, I suppose, but playing on vastly different fields." Liam had simply nodded, taking a slow sip of his water. "Something like that," he'd said. Later, as they were leaving, Clara had turned on him in the car. "Could you at least try to network? Julian is a huge deal. His new project, the Elysian Spire, is going to redefine the city skyline. And you just sat there like a lump." "It's embarrassing. He seemed to have your full attention," Liam had replied, his voice level, his eyes on the road. The accusation hung in the air between them, unspoken but deafening. "Don't be ridiculous," she'd snapped. "It's business. Something you wouldn't understand." That was the moment the fractures began to deepen. He had started paying closer attention, not out of suspicion, but out of a sad, clinical necessity. He was an architect, after all. He understood that a structure built on a faulty foundation could not stand. The client dinners became more frequent, the excuses for late nights more elaborate. Then came the catalyst, a small, innocuous detail on a credit card statement he happened to see on the kitchen counter. It was for a restaurant called La Saran. It was known for two things: its breathtakingly romantic ambience and its exorbitant prices. It was a place for lovers and oligarchs, not for closing a quarterly deal on concrete supply. He cross-referenced the date. It was a Tuesday, a client dinner night. But the client she had mentioned that week was a gruff, no-nonsense logistics manager from shipping firm, a man who, according to Clara, preferred steak and beer at a noisy pub. The lie was clumsy. It was arrogant. It was proof. He felt a profound, aching sadness, but no anger. Anger was a chaotic, destructive force. Liam preferred precision. He opened his laptop. He didn't search for her name or Julian's. He searched for the Elysian Spire. He traced the shell corporations behind the development, the tangled web of investors, the shaky financing. It took him less than an hour to find what he was looking for. The entire project was leveraged to the hilt, a house of cards waiting for a strong breeze. And Julian Croft, the man who built monuments, was standing at the very top with no safety net. Liam closed his laptop. He picked up his worn leather journal and a pen. It was time to draw a new blueprint. The days that followed were a study in quiet methodology. Liam's routine didn't change. He woke at dawn, drank his coffee while reading, and retreated to his study. To Clara, he was the same predictable, unambitious man. She was too consumed by her own world to notice the subtle shift in his focus. He wasn't sketching dream homes or conceptual public spaces. He was diagramming a conversation. He was mapping out a strategy. He made a series of phone calls, his voice calm and authoritative, a tone Clara had never heard him use. The first was to a man named Marcus Thorne, the head of the private equity firm that had been built with the proceeds from the Ethelred sale. "Marcus," Liam had said, his eyes on a flowchart he'd sketched in his journal, "I need you to start acquiring the debt on a development called the Elysian Spire. Quietly. I want controlling interest in the financing before the end of the month." There was no surprise in Marcus's voice, only brisk efficiency. "Consider it done, Liam." Any particular reason for the sudden interest in commercial real estate? You could call it a passion project, Liam replied, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. The second call was to a woman who was arguably the most feared divorce attorney in the state. He laid out the situation with detached clarity, providing dates, names, and financial records he had meticulously compiled. He wasn't a heartbroken husband. He was a client presenting a case. The attorney was impressed. Mr. Hayes, your preparation is thorough. We can have a petition filed and ready to serve at your command. Good, Liam said. Have a courier on standby next Tuesday evening. The final call was to a man named Antoine Dubois, the owner of La Saran. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Liam had done some pro bono design work for him, helping him navigate a labyrinth of zoning laws to save his restaurant from being demolished by a rapacious developer. It had been a small project for Liam, a favor for a friend, but for Antoine, it had saved his life's work. Liam, my friend, it has been too long. Antoine's voice boomed over the phone, thick with a French accent. To what do I owe the pleasure? Antoine, I need a favor, Liam said. I need a table for one next Tuesday. Your best table. And I need you to ensure that no matter what happens, my presence is not to be disturbed. There was a pause. Antoine was a discreet man who understood the nuances of such requests. For you, Liam, anything. The owner's table in the alcove. It has a perfect view of the entire room. It is yours. Will you be expecting company? Company will be present, Liam confirmed. But they will not be expecting me. With the pieces in place, he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he got when a complex design finally resolved itself, when all the disparate elements clicked into a harmonious whole. He was not destroying a life. He was demolishing a condemned structure to make way for something new, something honest. That week, Clara was more distant than ever, floating through their shared space like a ghost. She was energized, radiant, a stark contrast to the quiet, tired woman who usually returned from her tiresome dinners. She spoke animatedly about Julian Croft, dropping his name into conversations with casual precision. Julian thinks we should invest in offshore opportunities, she'd say, or Julian took me to see the site for the spire. Liam, it's breathtaking. You should design something like that one day. The comments were designed to sting, to highlight the vast gulf between her world of high-stakes development and his of quiet, small-scale creation. He would simply nod, turning a page in his book. Perhaps I will, he'd murmur. Her inability to get a reaction from him seemed to infuriate her. It was as if she needed him to be small so that she could feel big. She needed his resentment to validate her own choices. His placid acceptance gave her nothing to push against. He was a placid sea, and she had no idea of the powerful currents moving deep beneath the surface. On the final night, the Tuesday, she stood before the full-length mirror in their bedroom, adjusting a silk dress the color of blood. Another late one tonight, she announced to his reflection. We're in the final stages of Aspire financing. Julian is a nervous wreck. I have to hold his hand through it. The lie was so bald, so effortless. It was almost impressive. She turned, a brilliant false smile on her face. Don't wait up. Liam looked up from his journal, where he had been sketching the intricate joint of a timber frame house. He met her eyes in the mirror. Clara, he said, his voice soft. Be careful. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in her expression. A flash of guilt, perhaps, or surprise at his uncharacteristic warning. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of dismissive confidence. Honestly, Liam, I'm a big girl. I can handle a client dinner. She leaned down and gave him a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. Her perfume was a cloud of expensive florals, the scent of a stranger. He watched her leave, the click of her heels on the polished floor echoing in the silent house. Then he closed his journal, stood up, and went to his own closet to get dressed. The drive to La Saran was quiet. The city lights smeared across the rain-slicked windshield, a kaleidoscope of fractured colors. Liam felt no anger, no jealousy, only a profound and heavy sense of finality. He was a man walking toward a necessary demolition. He had chosen his attire with the same precision he applied to his blueprints. It was not a suit of armor, but a statement of self. A dark cashmere turtleneck, tailored gray trousers, and handmade Italian leather shoes that were worn to a soft, comfortable patina. It was a uniform of a man who has nothing to prove because he is utterly certain of who he is. On his wrist, the vintage watch his father had given him ticked with quiet, steady confidence. It was a 1950s Patek Philippe Calatrava, a masterpiece of understated elegance. To the untrained eye, like Arthur's or Julian's, it was just an old watch. To those who knew, it was a quiet declaration of taste and substance worth more than Julian's diamond-encrusted monstrosity. He had parked a block away, preferring to walk the final stretch. The rain had softened to a fine mist, and the air was cool and clean. He stood for a moment across the street from the restaurant, its name glowing in elegant white neon. Through the large picture window, he could see the warm, intimate interior, the tables draped in white linen, the soft glow of candlelight. It was a perfect stage. He saw them then, Clara and Julian, seated at a secluded corner booth. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her hand resting on his arm. Julian was leaning in close, his expression proprietary and smug. They looked like a portrait of success and intimacy, a perfect couple in a perfect setting. Liam took a deep, steadying breath, the cool air filling his lungs. The quiet before the storm. He crossed the street. The moment he stepped inside La Saran, the atmosphere shifted. The maitre d', a tall, severe-looking man, moved to intercept him, his eyes flicking over Liam's simple attire with practiced condescension. "Can I help you, sir?" The question was a dismissal. Before Liam could answer, Antoine Dubois himself emerged from the back, his face breaking into a wide, genuine smile. "Liam, you are here." He strode forward, clapping Liam on the shoulders and enveloping him in a warm hug, completely ignoring his stunned maitre d'. "Antoine, it's good to see you," Liam said, his voice calm and warm. "Your table is ready." "The best in the house, as promised," Antoine said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. He personally led Liam through the hushed dining room, past the curious glances of other patrons. He guided him to the owner's alcove, a slightly raised table set for one, partially shielded by elegant wrought iron scrollwork. It offered, as promised, a perfect, unobstructed view of Clara and Julian's booth. From his vantage point, Liam could see them, but they had not yet seen him. He watched them for a moment. Julian was gesturing grandly, no doubt regaling Clara with tales of his business acumen. Clara was looking at him with an expression of rapt adoration that Liam hadn't seen directed at himself in years. The performance was flawless. Liam settled into his chair. A waiter appeared instantly, pouring him a glass of water from a crystal bottle. "Mr. Dubois has instructed that everything is on the house for you tonight, Mr. Hayes," the waiter murmured. "He also recommended this," he added, presenting a bottle of wine. It was a 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild, a bottle worth more than the mortgage payment on their first apartment. "That will be perfect, thank you," Liam said. He let them have another 10 minutes. He sipped the exquisite wine, letting its complex notes unfold on his palate. He observed them not as a husband, but as a strategist observing his opponents. He saw the way Julian's eyes constantly scanned the room, a subtle insecurity betraying his outward arrogance. He saw the way Clara's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, a flicker of tension at the corners of her mouth. They were not two people in love. They were two people in a conspiracy. Finally, he caught Clara's eye. She was looking around the room, a queen surveying her court, when her gaze fell upon his alcove. There was a moment of pure incomprehension on her face, a cognitive dissonance as her brain tried to reconcile the image of her simple, unassuming husband sitting alone at the best table in the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Her smile faltered and collapsed. She nudged Julian, her gesture sharp and panicked. Julian looked over, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation, and then to outright fury. The show was about to begin. Liam took another slow sip of his wine and met their furious stares with an expression of serene, unassailable calm. He gave them a small, polite nod, a gesture that was both a greeting and a declaration. Check. The first move was theirs. After a frantic, whispered conference, Julian stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He strode towards Liam's table, his posture radiating aggression. He was a man used to solving problems with intimidation. Clara followed a few paces behind, her face a mask of pale, furious disbelief. Julian stopped before the alcove, planting his hands on the table. He was trying to loom over Liam, to use his physical presence to dominate. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. Liam didn't look up immediately. He slowly placed his wine glass on the table, the crystal making a soft, clear sound against the linen. He then raised his eyes to meet Julian's. "I'm having dinner," he said, his voice perfectly level. "This is a restaurant. That's generally what people do here." The calm, logical response seemed to enrage Julian further. "Don't play games with me. You followed us. You're stalking my client." "Your client?" Liam repeated, a single eyebrow raised in gentle inquiry. He finally turned his gaze to Clara, who was standing frozen behind Julian, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Is that what you are, Clara? A client?" Clara's face flushed a blotchy red. "Liam, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave. Now." "You are embarrassing me, am I?" Liam asked, his voice still quiet, yet it cut through the restaurant's low hum. "I was under the impression that having an affair with a man whose business is on the verge of collapse, while lying to your husband for years, was the embarrassing part. But I admit, my perspective might be skewed." The phrase "verge of collapse" landed like a physical blow. Julian flinched. "What did you just say?" "My business is stronger than ever. The Elysian Spire is fully funded, is it?" Liam took a small, black notebook and a pen from his jacket pocket. It wasn't his leather journal. It was a simple, functional tool for facts. He flipped it open. "According to my information, your primary lender, Sterling Financial, just called in your bridge loan. Your secondary investors have all been spooked by a sudden, aggressive acquisition of your debt by a private equity firm called Thorn Group. As of 4 p.m. this afternoon, you are insolvent, Julian. Your monuments, as you call them, are built on sand. And the tide just came in." Julian stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. The blustering rage drained out of him, replaced by a waxy, sickly pallor. He looked at Clara, then back at Liam, utterly bewildered. How could you possibly know that?" Clara found her voice, though it was thin and shaky. "He's lying, Julian. He's a nobody. A freelance architect who designs kitchen extensions. He doesn't know anything." Her words were meant to reassure Julian, but they were also for herself, a desperate attempt to hold on to the reality she had constructed, a reality where she was powerful and Liam was insignificant. Liam ignored her. He kept his eyes fixed on Julian. "Oh, I know a great deal," he said softly. "For instance, I know that you've been funding your lavish lifestyle, the watches, the cars, this very dinner, with money drawn directly from your investor capital. That's not just poor business, Julian. That's fraud." He let the word hang in the air. Fraud. A simple word with devastating implications. Julian stumbled back a step, looking for his chair as if his legs might give out. "That's a lie," he whispered, but there was no conviction in it. Liam continued, his voice maintaining its lethal calm. "And I know that you promised Clara a senior partnership in your new development company, a 10% stake in the Elysian Spire. Once the financing was secured and her divorce from her deadweight husband was finalized, he finally looked at Clara, his eyes holding no anger, only a deep, penetrating disappointment. Was that the term you used, Clara? Deadweight. It sounded like something you would say." Clara's face crumbled. The mask of fury was gone, replaced by raw, naked panic. This wasn't going the way it was supposed to. The simple man was not acting simple. He was not shouting, or crying, or making a scene. He was dismantling them, piece by piece, with a surgeon's precision. "Liam, please," she began, her voice cracking. "Let's not do this here. Let's go home and talk home." Liam considered the word. "The house is in my name, Clara. It was purchased with my money. You are, of course, welcome to retrieve your personal belongings tomorrow. I suggest you pack for an extended stay at your parents' house. The finality in his tone was absolute. The conversation she wanted to have was already over. This was merely the presentation of a verdict. The true revelation, the quiet bomb he had designed, was yet to come. He saved it, letting the weight of their other sins settle first. He watched as Julian frantically scrolled through his phone, his face growing paler with each passing second, no doubt seeing the emails and alerts that confirmed his financial ruin. He watched as Clara cycled through a series of desperate expressions, pleading, anger, confusion, trying to find a strategy that would work on this new, terrifying version of her husband. "Who are you?" Julian finally choked out, looking up from his phone. "How do you know all this?" Liam closed his small notebook and placed it on the table. He picked up his wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. He let the question linger, building the tension until it was a palpable thing in the air around them. He looked from Julian's terrified face to Clara's bewildered one. "Clara is right about one thing," he said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "I'm an architect. I design things. I build things." He paused, then gestured with his glass to the elegant, soaring space around them. "I designed this restaurant, for instance." A small pro bono project a few years ago. Antoine, who had been watching from a discreet distance, gave a small, respectful nod. Clara's eyes widened. She had always loved this restaurant, had spoken of its brilliant design, never once imagining her husband was its creator. "I also design software," Liam continued. "A little thing called Ethelred. Perhaps your engineering teams have used it, Julian? It's become the industry standard for structural modeling. I sold it a decade ago. The proceeds from that sale were used to found a private equity firm, a rather successful one. As it turns out, he let that sink in before delivering the final, devastating line. It's called the Thorn Group." The silence that followed was profound. It was the sound of a universe reordering itself. The Thorn Group, the firm that had just acquired Julian's debt, the firm that now owned him. Julian made a small, strangled sound, a gasp of a man who has been run through. Clara simply stared, her mind struggling to process the impossible truth. The quiet, unambitious man she had pitted and cheated on, the dead weight she was so eager to cast off, was the invisible hand that had just crushed her lover's world. He was the power she had been so desperate to align herself with. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible," Liam said. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out his old, worn leather journal. He opened on the table. Inside were not words, but sketches. Intricate, beautiful drawings of buildings, bridges, and complex structural systems. He flipped through the pages until he found the ones he was looking for. The original, hand-drawn concept sketches for the Elysian Spire. "You see, Julian," Liam said, his voice laced with a cold, hard irony. "I was the original architect on your project. My firm submitted the design concept anonymously in a competition 5 years ago. Your company acquired the plans, but you cut corners. You used cheaper materials, compromised the integrity of the design to maximize your profit margins. I couldn't in good conscience have my name attached to it." He looked at Julian, a flicker of genuine professional disgust in his eyes. "You're not a builder. You're a vandal. And I have a policy against allowing vandals to ruin my work." He tapped the journal. "The good news is, now that my firm owns the debt, we'll be taking over the project. We'll build it properly, the way it was meant to be built." He then turned his full attention to Clara. Her face was a ruin. The carefully constructed edifice of her superiority had been demolished, leaving nothing but the rubble of her own arrogance and deceit. "You wanted a man who built monuments, Clara," Liam said, his voice softening with a sad, final pity. "You had one. You just never bothered to look at the blueprints." The immediate aftermath was a tableau of collapse. Julian, a man defined by his bluster and bravado, seemed to shrink in his expensive suit. He sank into a chair at a nearby empty table, his head in his hands, muttering to himself. The monument builder had been reduced to rubble. Clara, on the other hand, shifted gears. The panic morphed into a desperate, frantic attempt at damage control. Tears welled in her eyes, real or manufactured. Liam couldn't tell, nor did he care. "Liam, I didn't know," she stammered, reaching for his hand across the table. He pulled it away, not sharply, but with a deliberate finality. "That's the point, Clara. You didn't know because you never asked. You never looked. You saw what you wanted to see. A simple man who made you feel powerful by comparison. You weren't interested in a partner. You wanted an accessory, a backdrop for your own ambition. That's not true," she cried, her voice rising, drawing more attention from the other diners. "I love you." The words sounded hollow, a desperate gambit from a player who had already been checkmated. "No," Liam said, his voice cutting through her performance. "You love the idea of me loving you. You love the security I provided, the stable, predictable life that allowed you to go out and pursue this." He gestured to the broken man and the wreckage of their evening. "My mistake was thinking that the woman I married still existed. The woman who was fascinated by my work, who would sit for hours while I explained the principles of cantilevered structures, who said she loved me for my mind, not for what I could buy her." He paused, the memory bringing a fresh wave of sadness. "That woman is gone, and I've been mourning her for a very long time. This," he said, looking at her with clear, cold eyes, "is just the funeral." Just then, a man in a courier's uniform quietly approached the table. He looked at Liam, who gave a subtle nod. The courier placed a large manila envelope on the table in front of Clara and then retreated as silently as he had arrived. Clara stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. "What is that?" "Divorce papers," Liam said simply. "My lawyer has been very thorough. The terms are non-negotiable. They are based on the prenuptial agreement you insisted we sign, the one your father's lawyers drafted to protect your family assets from me. I've chosen to honor it. You will leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it." The irony was devastating. The document designed to protect her from a poor, unambitious husband would now be her financial ruin, severing her from a fortune she never knew existed. Antoine chose that moment to approach their table, his expression one of grave formality. He was holding a small leather bill folder. He didn't look at Liam or Clara. He walked directly to Julien. "Monsieur," Antoine said, his voice crisp, "your credit card has been declined." Julien looked up, his face a mess of confusion and despair. "What? Run it again." "We have run it 4 times," Antoine replied, his voice hardening. "It appears your line of credit has been frozen. Perhaps you have another form of payment for your dinner?" The bill, Liam knew, would be astronomical. The champagne, the caviar, the multiple courses, a final, vulgar display of a wealth that was no longer real. Julien stared blankly, utterly defeated. Clara, seeing a last, desperate opportunity to demonstrate value, opened her purse. "I'll take care of it," she said, her voice trembling. But Liam spoke first. No, all eyes turned to him. "Let him handle it." He looked at Antoine. "Antoine, perhaps you can arrange a payment plan with Mr. Croft. Or he could wash dishes. I hear you're short-staffed in the kitchen." The comment was delivered without malice, a simple statement of practical solutions. But it was the final, crushing humiliation for Julien. Clara looked at Liam, a new kind of horror in her eyes. It was the horror of realizing she had not just underestimated him. She had fundamentally misunderstood the very nature of the man she had married. His quietness was not weakness. It was strength. His patience was not passivity. It was strategy. And his justice, she was now seeing, was as precise and unyielding as his designs. He stood up, placing $100 bill on the table, more than enough to cover his single glass of wine. "Thank you for dinner, Antoine," he said, turning to leave. "Liam, wait," Clara cried, scrambling to her feet. "Where are you going?" He stopped and looked back at her, his silhouette framed by the restaurant's grand archway. "I'm going home," he said. "To my home. You need to find somewhere else to go." And with that, he turned and walked out into the misty night, leaving the ruins of his old life behind him without a single backward glance. In the weeks that followed, the full consequences of that night rippled outwards, reshaping the landscape of several lives. The collapse of Julian Croft's development empire was swift and brutal. The Thorn Group, under Marcus Thorn's efficient direction, assumed control of the Elysian Spire project. They honored the original design, Liam's design, and announced that the project would move forward, but under new leadership and with a renewed commitment to quality. Julian Croft's name was erased from the project's history. He was a footnote, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the dangers of hubris. He faced multiple lawsuits from his defrauded investors and a federal investigation. His fall from grace was absolute. Clara, as Liam had predicted, retreated to her parents' estate. The divorce was finalized quickly and quietly. The ironclad prenup she had once wielded as a symbol of her family's superiority became the cage of her new reality. She was left with a modest trust fund she had brought to the marriage and her own salary, which suddenly seemed laughably small without Liam's quiet, foundational support to handle all their real expenses. She was forced to sell her car and trade her designer wardrobe for a life of diminished expectations under her parents' roof. The shame was her constant companion. Her father, Arthur, was apoplectic. His rage, however, was not directed at Clara's infidelity, but at her incompetence. "You had a billionaire in your hands, and you let him go," he had bellowed at her during one of their many arguments. "You threw away a dynasty for a cheap fraud like Croft. How could you be so stupid?" His words revealed the transactional nature of his own worldview. He didn't care about his daughter's happiness, only her strategic value. Eleanor, her mother, was quieter but no less damning. Her disappointment was a cold, constant presence in the house, a silent judgment on Clara's failure. The silent enabler had become the silent executioner of her daughter's self-esteem. Liam, for his part, moved through the demolition of his marriage with quiet purpose. He sold the house, the cold, concrete showroom that had never felt like a home. He donated most of the sharp-angled furniture to charity. He kept only his books, his father's watch, and his work from the study. He moved into a penthouse apartment in a building he had designed years ago, a place of warm woods, natural light, and stunning views of the city he loved. He threw himself into his work, not as a recluse, but as a man rediscovering his passion without the weight of a lie suffocating it. He took over as the lead architect on the Elysian Spire, this time with his name proudly and publicly attached to it. The project became a symbol of his new life, a structure built on a foundation of integrity, reaching for the sky. About 2 months after their dinner at La Saran, Clara called him. Her voice on the phone was small, stripped of all its former arrogance. She asked if they could meet. Liam agreed, suggesting a small, quiet coffee shop near his new office. He saw her before she saw him. She looked diminished. Her clothes were tasteful, but not expensive. Her hair was pulled back simply. The artifice was gone. She looked, for the first time in a long time, like the woman he had first met. They sat in silence for a few moments after ordering their coffee. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally, her eyes fixed on her cup. "Not for the affair. There's no apology for that. But for not seeing you. For all the years I spent looking right through you." Liam listened, saying nothing, giving her the space to speak. "My father is right," she continued, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "I was a fool. I was so obsessed with the appearance of success, with status, and what other people thought, that I couldn't recognize real substance when I was living with it. I traded gold for glitter. The glitter was very convincing," Liam said, not unkindly. "It's designed to be, I know," she said, and a genuine tear traced a path down her cheek. "I've lost everything. My career is a joke. No one wants to work with Julian Croft's partner. My parents, they look at me with such contempt. I have nothing. You have yourself, Clara," Liam said quietly. "You have the chance to decide who you want to be without your father's expectations, or Julian's influence, or my quiet stability. You get to draw a new blueprint." She looked up at him then, her eyes searching his. "Is there any chance for us?" The question was a last flicker of hope from a dying fire. Liam shook his head, slowly but definitively. "The foundation is gone, Clara. We can't rebuild on that. Some structures are not meant to be salvaged. They have to be cleared away to make room for something new." He wasn't cruel, but he was clear. The past was the past. He stood up, leaving a $20 bill on the table. "I do wish you well, Clara. I hope you build something beautiful for yourself. something that lasts. He walked away, leaving her with her coffee and the difficult, necessary work of her own reconstruction. Liam stood on the observation deck of the nearly completed Elysian Spire. The wind was crisp and clean at this height, and the city spread out below him like a living map. His city. For so long, he had lived his life in the shadows, believing that his work, his true self, should be a secret. He thought it was a way to protect his integrity, to ensure he was valued for the right reasons. But he realized now that hiding his strength had not protected him. It had enabled others to diminish him. It had allowed a lie to fester in the heart of his own home. True worth isn't about what you have, but who you are. And who you are should never be a secret. It wasn't about flaunting wealth or power, but about living in your own truth, quietly and confidently. It was about building a life like a well-designed building, where the internal structure is honest and strong, regardless of the facade. From now on, he would live in the light. He would continue to create, to build, to design things that would outlast him. But he would do it as himself. Liam Hayes, the architect, the man who had finally torn down his own false walls to let the sun in. He turned his face to the sky, a genuine, peaceful smile spreading across his face, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly free. The story we've shared tonight is about the quiet strength that often goes unseen. It's a reminder that a person's value isn't determined by the noise they make or the status they project, but by the integrity of their foundation. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. We hope this story resonated with you. What part of Liam's journey stood out to you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Your insights and discussions are what make this community so special. If you haven't already, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and the quiet triumph of character. Thank you for being here with us today, and we look forward to sharing another story with you soon.